His bar mitzvah was in Europe after his father came to New York, and he was left behind with his mother and his sisters. His older brothers were already learning in university in Berlin and Brussels. He described how that year his father had assigned the responsibility of learning with him to Rav Aharon, who was close to the family. Rav Aharon at that time was a young man, maybe 24 years old perhaps. And then he came over with his mother and his sisters sometime later after his bar mitzvah.
When I was still a high school student, visiting the Beis Medrash at Yeshiva University, I saw a man sitting in the back, very quietly, looking over a Gemara for a very long period of time, intensely. And I had no idea who that person was. And later I was told this was Rav Aharon Solevichik. And it was stunning to me because here was a man of such stature sitting in the back of the Beis Medrash. That was inconceivable. Rosh Yeshiva sit up front. Rosh Yeshivas dominate a place. Rav Aharon was learning Torah.
I grew up in Chicago and spent much of my childhood in my grandparents' home, but it was not called my grandparents' home. It was not called Zadie's home. That was always called Bubby's house. Just as my grandfather himself said, the tent of Sarah and the tent of Rivka embodies everything that is central to the Jewish homes. Bubby was always the central figure in everything that took place in that house.
Such a great role model for all of us, growing up as youngsters. He's 17 years old. The summertime was in June, at the end of that very year. And he called me up on the phone to tell me that he couldn't come. I should tell the other boys, hello, this is Ahron Solevichik. I was shaking on the phone, articulate. He spoke, such a perfect English. We weren't used to this. The vicissitudes. Just give you one example of the word. I said, what's that? We began to learn these words from him. It was much more important, the concepts, but his form of expression was to us quite breathtaking.
I remember my great aunt telling me how when they were first deciding whether to move to Chicago, she asked my grandmother, is this move good for you? And my grandmother's response was, if it's good for Ahron, it's good for me.
1965, a young man from Buffalo, New York, visited Yeshiva College for the first time. He was an NCSYer. I brought him to the shiur. Rav Aharon asked him, have you ever studied Talmud? He said, no, I haven't. Rav Aharon then gave a shiur where he explained every term so well, we explained every concept so perfectly, that at the end of the shiur, several of the finest Talmidim said, I've never heard such a good shiur. Please come back, they told him. That young man today is a Rosh Yeshiva. And the first time he ever learned Gemara was with Rav Aharon Solevichik. There are hundreds of stories like that.
When he'd give a shiur on a specific topic, he had the ability to define the principles, but then he would show how relevant those principles were to issues that we were dealing with. So on the one hand, you had the great theoretician. On the other hand, someone of great practical insight.
We would go for Shabbos, and my grandfather would talk about the news of the day, the politics of the moment as well, to give a perspective on world affairs that was Torah-based. For us, that melding of the news of the day and Torah were central to that Shabbos experience.
I met Rabbi Soloveichik when he was a Rebbe in Yeshiva Chaim Berlin. Rav Aharon had a very close relationship with Rav Hutner, the Rosh Yeshiva. Both shared the same relationship with students. Warm, personal, caring. Some years later, I was given the job of creating an NCSY. I had a very close relationship with Rav Aharon because I discovered that he had a way with young people. A young person who came to Shabbaton and heard him speak and then had questions. And he would spend time with that individual and answer the questions. There was a realization that to be successful with young people, you have to have relationships. You have to be able to give your time. You have to give them the understanding that they are really something, and that somebody of great stature, as Rav Aharon was, would be ready to sit down and talk to them and explain to them what is Gemara and Mishnah, what are these halachas. This concept is a concept that I took to NCSY.
The highlight of the 1985 convention, somebody said Rabbi Soloveichik is entering the banquet hall, 500 people standing, all eyes on the entranceway. You could have heard a pin drop. People were just awestruck at the incredible effort that it took for him to come and participate in this event with these kids. And he rose to the microphone. he began to speak like a Rebbe, like a father, like someone who had a long-standing relationship with each and every one of these NCSYers and staff members and Rabbanim that were there. And he started with the words of Moda'ani, how we as Jews every single day wake up to thank the Ribbono Shel Olam for everything that we have. It was just an incredible experience.
More than that was the experience that the Rebitzen had when she asked me about some of the people in the room. And I explained to her stories of some of the teenagers in the room and some of the advisors in the room, many of whom had become religious through NCSY, and she was fascinated by everything that was going on.
My grandmother wrote beautiful poetry, both in English and in Hebrew. She was very well versed in not just Tanakh, but in Mamorei Chazal, in Hebrew literature, in Dikduk, in Shai Agnon, Bialik, poetry.
We have 2 children with disabilities, and when we began to try to develop services within our community, we found many closed doors. I'm a Balas Tshuva. I found a Torah community very alienating, and Rav Aharon was like a beacon of hope, a voice of truth, a man who stood boldly and said, this is our obligation, and we will take care and embed these children within the Torah community. And it was deeply inspiring, and it was a lifeline for us. And that's what he was all about, and the Rebitzen always at his side.
I have known him since 1968 when I came to the yeshiva. As a boy of 13, I left my hometown of Omaha, Nebraska to attend the Hebrew Theological College in Skokie. He was a firm believer the chain of Torah, the chain of the Masorah, would be judged by the strength of its weakest link. We have to tend to what would otherwise be the weakest links and strengthen them. When I hear stories about Rabbi Soloveichik's involvement with people out of the mainstream, it doesn't surprise me to hear them, because I know that whether it's a Jew from a secular background or a person with a learning disability, he would be there and he would be the champion.
When he had a particular point of view and he felt that the Ribbono Shel Olam wanted him to articulate it, he was unbending, and he feared no man.
Watching him daven in the base medrash of Yeshiva University, and it was very hard for him to get in, walking with his cane, but he took the long way around to his chair, and he didn't want to disturb Rav David Lifshitz, zt'l. When he finally got to his chair, Rav David looked up and saw him there and ran over to say good morning to him. And watching the sensitivity of these two Gedolim, Rav David rushing over to say good morning, and Rav Aharon taking a long way around not to trouble Rav David, was one of the most moving sights I've ever seen.
For me, one of the greatest learning experiences that I had was accompanying my grandfather to the airport. And there I would see him engage individuals from all walks of life, seeing him interact with people in the airport, and I would see the awe with which they would regard my grandfather. They knew nothing about the Torah that he was teaching, but they sensed something extraordinary about this man. The way my grandfather responded to those individuals was just incredible.
Her youngest, Chaim, and our oldest, Binyamin, are the same age. They were together in school, they became good friends. And Rav Solevichik used to say she was very happy because she felt she had her older family and her younger family. She said Chaim was missing out on things that she used to do with the older ones because she was already so involved in so many other ways. And I would take Chaim wherever I took Binyamin. I made a Lag BaOmer party for the children. They were about 5 years old at the time. We were going to do egg dyeing at the party. This is based on an old Litvisher custom. The students of Rabbi Akiva who became soldiers went to spy behind the Roman lines. They colored the shells of the eggs so they should recognize each other because they were dressed as Roman soldiers while they were spying. On the day of the party, Rav Aharon Solevichik brought Chaim. So I felt so bad. I said, Rav Solevichik, I would have come to pick him up, or I would have had a parent pick him up. It meant that he had to walk over to the bus on Kimball, take a bus down Kimball Avenue, and then walk over from Kimball to our house. It certainly was at least 20 to 25 minutes to do the trip the way that he did it. And he smiled and he said, no, don't worry. First of all, it gave me time with Chaim. But he said, second of all, I'm so happy somebody is keeping the old Litvish minhagim going. So I just had to come and see that the children were having a good time at this egg dyeing party. And to me, that was the essence of Rav Solevichik.
One summer at the Laurel Park Hotel in the Catskill Mountains, I was 17 and I was his waiter. Of the waiters and busboys, half of us, including myself, were Kohanim. When a guest suddenly passed away early on a Shabbos morning in the hotel, The question was whether we Kohanim could continue to work or had to leave the hotel. We waited outdoors while Rav Aharon and his son inspected the building structure. The body was in a room attached to the hotel, and the Rav determined that the room was not part of the hotel, so we could work. But the Rav's son said, "Abba, there's an open window and an overhang over the roof, so they are connected." Rav Aharon said, "There's a screen on the window." The son said, "But the screen is warped and detached from the side of the building." Rav Aharon replied, "But it's less than a handbreadth." The Rav therefore permitted us to work. And then there was the meal which Rav Aharon told me, "I don't want vegetables." His wife responded to him, "Ahron, you have to have vegetables." He said, "Ella, I don't like vegetables." She said, "But they're good for you. You have to have them." Rav Aharon turned to me and said, "I'll take the vegetables."
The heroism we saw that he displayed each and every day, living with the after effects of his stroke, and how, despite his tremendous disabilities and partial paralysis, the way he persevered, which is a soft word. It was like he was living life with a mission.
My grandfather would walk up the stairs to go into the building one by one. He would count, but he wouldn't count the regular way. He would count the way the Kohen Gadol would count when he was Zorek Ben Habadim in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, as we read in the Avod on Yom Kippur. As he went up step by step, he would say, "Achas, achas v'achas, achas v'shtayim."
From the classroom to the Beis Medrash to the door. Sometimes he would have a very hard time walking. I'd have to watch him very carefully. He wouldn't fall. The one time he actually fell was the day my grandmother was in the hospital. And you could see it bothered him so much. He just couldn't walk like he always did. He simply fell. Just didn't have the strength to go on without her being well.
My grandfather lived every moment of life as an avoda, and every step was another korban. Every step was another sacrifice.
The fact that he died only 2 months after she did, they weren't able to live apart.
What he wanted to do more than anything else was to spread Hashem's Torah and to make it beloved to anyone who would come and listen.
To be with Rav Aharon when he davened, to be with Rav Aharon when he walked across the room, to be with Rav Aharon when he wrestled with an issue, was to be in the presence of greatness. I know I speak for the entire extended NCSY family when I repeat the words of his brother, the Rav, who said, "Ahron is the conscience of our family." And I think all of us in NCSY and Ben Zakkai agree. Rav Aharon Solevichik and his Rebitzen Ella were the conscience of our extended family.